This is a story about a guy who was bullied out of a campaign for supporting his friend through his mother's death. That may sound like a bit of a stretch, but as this tale unravels, you may find today's antagonist just that unsavory. Roll post. This isn't so much an RPG horror story, but a story about a former friend's toxic personality and how I was forced out of not only a D&D campaign, but also an entire social circle. Names have been changed for the usual reasons. Guillermo, the former friend in question, was a very sore loser both in and out of game. He also very clearly had small man syndrome despite being a big dude. Basically, he was insecure in the most self-centered way. Guillermo constantly needed to be the center of attention and openly mocked and bullied anyone he perceived as stealing his thunder. To bring it back to gaming, here are some examples of his behavior as a gamer. I once ran Star Wars Imperial Assault for Guillermo and a few other friends. Anyone who's played the game will know how weird the line of sight can be. You could think you're completely in cover, but due to careful aiming, the Imperial forces would be able to land a shot. This resulted in Guillermo repeatedly calling BS on my line of sight, joking that I was curving bullets like in the movie Wanted. He'd also complain whenever he got targeted instead of the tank. I tried explaining that I was trying to run combat like frantic firefights where shots were going in all directions and that nobody was truly safe amidst the chaos. Furthermore, I argued that soldiers would try and flesh out the sniper in the cover, the character he was playing, instead of letting him pick them off one by one. But no, this wasn't acceptable. He insisted I was picking on him. You know that one friend who is so extremely annoying whenever you're playing a game with them to the point where you feel bad for winning or playing the game at all? This is that. They can be the coolest guy ever, but as soon as you sit down with some games, they get so ultra competitive that they cannot accept the results of any defeat. Either due to bad luck or their own tiny brain, losing just makes no sense to them. Understandably, this behavior can be rooted in deep-seated insecurities, but this guy is far worse than just being petty at the game table, as we're about to see. Roll post. On the flip side, the same group from Imperial Assault also played Gloomhaven, wherein Guillermo misinterpreted a rule to allow him to dish out some seriously overpowered damage. When I looked up the rule and corrected him, his response was, "Shut the fuck up, cunt." That was essentially his catchphrase whenever he was called out on anything. In fact, he once said that to me in front of total strangers in a store full of people during a D&D Adventurers League night. What did I do to deserve that? I told him he should be rolling initiative for identical monsters per group instead of per individual monster as he was doing. Another example is my experience playing Magic the Gathering with him. We'd mostly played Commander and EDH, an indisputably casual format. Our playgroup started out fairly healthy. Until one day, Guillermo turned up with a finely tuned combo deck that could consistently win in the early game, even if we tried to disrupt his game plan. If people want to play cutthroat decks in a casual format, fine. It's a bit of a dick move, but I'm still fine with it. However, Guillermo would be the first to get salty whenever anybody else won. He would accuse them of using cheese tactics or paying to win, even though his own deck wasn't exactly budget friendly. What's even worse than a sore loser? A hypocritical sore loser. They'll use all of the sweaty cheese tactics in the world, spend more money on the game than the US military budget, but the second anyone else gets a win, they freak out and accuse you of the very thing they're doing, because they think everyone else is as bad as they are. These people are man-children who need everything to go their way, or they'll throw a bigger tantrum than Craig after being reminded of age of consent laws. So, back to D&D. Due to the inspiration from playing Gloomhaven, I eventually bought the D&D starter set and tried my hand at DMing Lost Mine of Phandelver for various groups. I had a blast, and thus began my life as the Forever DM. I seriously don't mind. I love being a DM. Shortly afterwards, Guillermo went out and bought the PHB and the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide books, which was music to my ears because what DM doesn't love a player who comes prepared? However, when I upgraded from the starter set and bought my own copy of the PHB, Guillermo seemed upset, surprise surprise, and asked why I'd bothered since he already had a PHB. I shrugged and told him the truth, that owning a copy would help me become a better DM. Quick note before I start wrapping things up, I don't want it to seem like I'm constantly trashing this guy, but I keep remembering little tidbits that irritate me in retrospect. On the topic of running Phandelver, Guillermo jumped on one of my campaigns and almost immediately started bullying another player. At the beginning of one session, Guillermo even said out loud, "Wouldn't it be funny if we derailed this campaign?" And now, we've arrived at the story I teased at the start. Guillermo eventually got to DM his first 5e campaign. Aside from his stubborn refusal to acknowledge certain rules, he's actually a great DM, but his talent isn't in question here. It was Horde of the Dragon Queen, which I was interested to try out despite all the less than favorable reviews I'd seen. We managed to pique the interest of our drinking buddies and even had a kind of session 0 one night over a few rounds of beers. Our first session went very well and we were all keen to play again, but finding a time to get everyone together would prove tricky because we all had other things, jobs, university, etc. to deal with. Regardless, Guillermo proposed that we do it again the same time next week. However, I wasn't able to commit to same time next week as I had another RPG session scheduled that night. In the end, that didn't matter, as my other friend Ricardo reminded me that night was also the anniversary of his mother's death, and he wanted to spend the night with his friends to help him get through it. No way I was going to abandon Ricardo in favor of playing make-believe in the Forgotten Realms, so I told my D&D group that I wasn't able to make it due to other commitments. I didn't specify what those commitments were because, quite frankly, it was really nobody's business. Unfortunately, Ricardo ended up also inviting Guillermo, who was pissed that my reason for not playing D&D was getting shit-faced. He didn't seem to care that I was spending time with Ricardo during a very stressful time of the year for him and accused me of lying about having other commitments to get out of playing D&D with him. The next day, Guillermo repeatedly, constantly badgered me about whether I was truly committed to the campaign or not. I eventually got sick of having to defend myself and dropped out of the campaign. I forgot who blocked whom, but I haven't spoken to him since, over 2 years ago. The really sucky part of all of this is having lost a good circle of friends, including those drinking buddies I'd Horde of the Dragon Queen with. Since they were Guillermo's friends first, I didn't really feel comfortable attending any of their events, and eventually drifted apart from the group. It's a shame because I really liked those people, and to a certain extent, actually enjoyed spending time with Guillermo. However, in the end, his needy behavior just got way too much to deal with. Guillermo really rubs me as one of those guys who can be very charismatic, but is just awful when it comes to gaming. Like, it's not enough that they win, but everyone else must lose and know they're stupid losers because they lost. On top of that, hounding someone repeatedly for supporting a grieving friend is just disgusting. OP didn't even need a reason to stop. If he didn't want to arrive, it should have been respected. But if you thought you've heard pain, let me put you onto some of this. Campaign derailed by group trying to make a barbecue sauce scry porn empire. Roll post. I had only played D&D once, and was a player in a long-running Vampire the Masquerade game. The DM refused to build a D&D campaign, so while I was unemployed for 6 months, I applied for new jobs and wrote a homebrew D&D campaign. The players were a monk, rogue, bard, old GM, warlock, druid. The warlock, druid, and bard had been playing together for over a decade, and the monk and rogue had been new additions like myself about 18 months before I started alternating with our GM. For the first leg of my journey, I borrowed most of my story from Against the Cult of the Reptile God by Douglas Niles. I had expanded it a bit by adding a market to Orlane where they had met and befriended an NPC drug dealer. He was supposed to be a throwaway, but they loved the voice I used for him so much that they decided to keep visiting him and convinced him to switch jobs. More on that later. I had created a side quest for the main campaign that would include them meeting an NPC who made a mistake and accidentally invented barbecue sauce. Everything is going well with the main quest in this town, and this was supposed to be the last thing they did after freezing the town. But when they met the NPC, they asked if he remembered how he made it. I said yes, not thinking much of it. They came up with a plan. They used all the treasure they found to finance the ability to manufacture the sauce, buy an inn, and hired the drug dealer to run the inn while they were away. Instead of continuing with the second half of the module, they went to the next town and secured distribution from the first town to this one, which was a port I had created with the NPC they were supposed to simply trade the sauce to. The side quest was supposed to lead them setting up a child with a small sailing ship and ferrying them across the sea, and eventually to the dungeon from the module. But they used every trade I had created and continued to expand the distribution to other cities and regions in my homebrew world. There were a ton of nat 20s on persuasions, and I was too inexperienced to know that that did not mean they automatically succeeded on skill checks. The boy was basically going to be their first merchant ship, sailing the barbecue sauce up and down the seas. They went from town to town doing nothing but expanding their empire. They secured licenses to have their inn be allowed to be a brothel. They hired magic users to try and invent a form of scrying porn. They were in talks to open a second location in the third town they were in, but didn't have enough treasure left over to make it official. After a few sessions of this, I basically had to railroad them back on story by bringing the cultists out of hiding to attack a town they were making their deals in. Then have my lord of this homebrew region, who they were in talks to make the barbecue sauce the main condiment of the army, order them to find their hideout. Come on, this was funny. I get it being annoying to the DM. I do. They wanted to run a module, but are now dealing with a pack of Bezoses. The DM probably railroaded them back onto their adventure, but if I was running this game, I would toss the module to the side and readjust the story to be about their struggles building an empire, and the enemies that try and stop them. Somebody built a copycat barbecue sauce and stole your recipe. It's cutting your profits. What do? You can find technology that would make scry porn possible, but the material needed can only be found in a dangerous dimension. It's on you to find out how to get there and retrieve it. There is so much opportunity here. Again, no matter which way this goes, no hate to the DM. This is just my style of DMing. I've run this campaign a few times since then, but I've tweaked the open world rules a bit to exclude barbecue sauce scry porn empires. And now, this last story is short but serious. I'll throw a quick content warning for mention of sexual assault. Roll post. I've been playing with a potential sexual predator. In our session, we have a few diverse players and all have our lives outside the table. One of the players, who is a paladin in-game, isn't always there, often missing sessions due to a tough life. We never asked because if he wanted to share, he would. One day, he missed a session because he needed to be with his girlfriend. He ran through girlfriends so fast that he had a new one every month. Not meaning to be nosy, my friend asked the DM if everything is okay with Paladin and if we could help in any way. The DM casually just says the court case is getting to him, but he'll be fine. This took us by surprise, and we said we knew nothing about it, to which the DM says nonchalantly, "Oh, 3 women have accused him of underage sex with them when they were 15, and him in his early 20s, as well as sexual harassment." Our jaws hit the ground, as this had been kept from all of us. The DM knew because he had kids and the paladin had to legally tell him to be allowed in his house. Since finding this out, me and a few of my friends are unsure how to proceed. It seems wrong to be playing with him while these allegations are going on, but yet he hasn't been found guilty, and DM, who has a teenage daughter, claims he knows Paladin and he would never do that, so it's all cool. So, people's opinions? Okay, first, this is a very serious topic and the comment section is probably going to be on fire, but as OP asked for opinions, I'm going to share mine. If I was in this scenario, I would fade out of the game silently, at least until the case clears up and there's a proper verdict. However, this looks really bad for 2 reasons. One, and most importantly, I'm not sure what state they're in or what the laws are, but I think you only have to warn people before entering their home if you've already been declared guilty. So maybe he's already been convicted of a similar crime. 2, there are several people coming for him. I could understand giving your friend the benefit of the doubt if you know them really well and honestly believe that they're incapable of this behavior. But if 3 different individuals are saying he victimized them, it's 3 times harder to believe him. False accusations are real. I'm not trying to say they don't exist. But with nothing else to go off of, and the fact that this scenario has several elements that you don't normally see in falsely accused people, I would avoid him. If OP really liked him and his company, then of course I would wait at the very least to see if the courts think he actually did it. Anyways, sorry to end on such a serious note. I have some other cool videos right here. Give them a watch, they're pretty cool. Till next time.